Hi there, welcome folks. You're probably getting connected here. Just so everyone's aware, I do have the ability for camera and microphones turned off for everyone at the moment, but later in the session I will allow it to happen. You're welcome to send me a message in the chat. Um, Also, just to let folks know, this call is being recorded for the first half of the session while we deliver some content, and it'll also be recorded in the later part of the session, but won't be recorded when we get into small group discussions. So just invite you to turn off your cameras and microphones whenever you feel the need to at any point. Again, they are disabled at this moment. Yeah, and you can also change your name on the Zoom app as well if you don't want your information to be shared on the recording later on. The recordings are going to be made available on YouTube so people can access it for their PD at a later date. Dom, I'm going to get started here. If you can allow people in, admit them as they come in, if possible, it'd be really, really great. But I'll also keep an eye as well. So folks, my name is Tyler Colburn. I am the professional development consultant here at the Nova Scotia Community College. And this is our first PD activity for the year for 2025, which feels wild to me. I don't know what you folks on the call, but I feel like the holidays was just like 2 minutes ago. So I'm feeling a little unsettled by how fast January is going. But yeah, this is the first part of the series of Active Hope around the climate emergency and social work. Pardon me. So we're going to be exploring the intersections between social work practice at different levels and how it relates to green social work, this idea of green social work, but also how what is the scope of practice and the accountability for social workers to address climate change and climate mitigation. Before we get started, I am going to do a land acknowledgement here. And I just want to begin by acknowledging I'm speaking from Chipuktuk. So I'm in the HRM, the Halifax Regional Municipality in Chipuktuk, and this is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I also want to recognize the inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq that were established in the Peace and Friendship Treaty signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for ongoing relationships between nations. And I think that's important to hold on to as we explore this concept of, green social work and climate justice. We can't have that conversation without also recognizing treaty rights and the stewardship of the lands by Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. They are absolutely interconnected concepts. And so we are not doing a very good job of being in a right relationship from nation to nation, I would say, as a settler Canadian. But it's important to acknowledge the treaties that do guide our work on this land. So I just want to take time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. And I'm going to invite you now or later in the chat to name the land that you're on. So again, I'm in Chibuktuk. I live in Punamukutijik on the other side of the harbor. And it's really helpful to hear from folks who are on this call where you're calling in from. When we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truth. So there's a quote here at the bottom that says, understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around. And so from a dominant, settler colonial, white supremacist, capitalist context, it's really easy for humans to believe that they are have dominance over the land. But the reality is that we are expressions of nature. We are expressions of this land. And there's more in common with the tree stump here and humans than we think. And so we are expressions of nature. Let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. And I'm thinking of land defenders and water protectors across Turtle Island here in Mi'kma'ki who are consistently working in resistance to that settler colonial, white supremacist, hetero, patriarchal context that is, sees the land as something to exploit and have dominance over. So just want to express gratitude for the folks who are doing that work. I want to ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. And so here at the college, as we think about climate justice, it's also a process of thinking about how we decolonize ourselves so that we can understand that we are entangled and accountable with the land. And that comes from Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we can embrace. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice in this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. And recognizing that decolonization is an active commitment for settlers and something we have to consider every single day in our policies and our relationships, how we work, how we engage. And just knowing that it's always present, it's always there. Colonization isn't something that happened in the past, it's present today. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. And hopefully this session, as one part of many sessions around active hope and this idea of addressing climate justice, hopefully it helps us be in right relationship with this land and with one another. And a reminder, when thinking about the peace and friendship treaties, we are all treaty people. And so when considering, if you're a settler Canadian like myself, what is your accountability to the treaties? What is your accountability to decolonization? What is your accountability to addressing climate justice in a good way? So here we're really, at the college committed to working towards Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions. And you might be familiar with the 2024 CASW updates to the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. We are in the process of revising ours as well. And it truly deepens our commitment to truth and reconciliation, decolonization. And I hope that as something you see present in the work of the college, and I hope it's something that you see being applicable in your own practice context. I also want to acknowledge reparations for people of African descent, and to be really clear that it's not a part of a land acknowledgement, but it is important to acknowledge that the forces of settler colonialism and white supremacy and anti-Black racism, they're entangled and connected. The same forces of settler colonialism are also, what also contributed to the enslavement and displacement of people of African descent. So here we are committed to reparations. And so for us, that's about restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. And so just really ensuring that the work that we do forward in a good way is honoring the unique and powerful history of African Nova Scotians and people of African descent, and also committing to assure that we're not recreating some of those patterns of the past. Hi, folks. I see you saying the name of the land that you're on here in the chat, and I really appreciate that. So the history of people of African descent in Nova Scotia is marked by resilience, contribution, and profound influence in the province's social fabric. So from the Black Loyalists and the Maroons to the Southern American Black refugees, legacy of these communities have indelibly shaped Nova Scotia's cultural landscape. Thinking a lot about, February is coming up and it's African Heritage Month, and we should never just be celebrating and recognizing African heritage in just one month. It should be always present. And this year's theme is Legacies in Action, Celebrating Black Brilliance. And just wondering, considering as we think about climate justice, what are the ways that environmental racism or principles of Afrocentric social work relate to issues of climate justice? And later on in this series of Active Hope, we'll be working with Dr. Ingrid Waldron in April with a session on environmental racism. So looking forward to that and, reflecting on the ways that this is connected to reparations. This quote on the left here from Elie Wiesel is, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." So as we're considering safer social work practice and the professional development of the college, we are always working towards addressing systemic issues across multiple levels, whether it's at the interpersonal level, the individual level, the institutional, or the ideological. Our practice, our professional development is aligned with our code of ethics and our standard of practice towards justice, towards liberation. That is the ideal. It's always imperfect, and sometimes we get it right and sometimes we get it wrong, but that's the goal, to always be, taking a side and working towards justice and liberation. So I hope as we engage in this session, that's the mindset that you're holding. Some framing for our time together, and specifically around the small group discussions we'll be having a little bit later. And this comes from the work of Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. Highly encourage you to look out for their work. It's amazing. But the first one is, your engagement with the session may not have immediate and or practical application for you, and that's okay. So just challenging the consumer mindset that's so pervasive in society that we sign up for something and it's going to meet exactly our needs. So hoping that you come with a bit of curiosity and acknowledge that this may or may not align up with your understanding or your hopes and desires for this session. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but ask to be open to seeing what happens. So again, reinforcing the idea of curiosity, acknowledging that if you're here today, it's probably because you care about climate justice, and also that you want to maybe complete your PD, but you might have a different perspective on climate justice. You might have a different understanding of what that means for you. So as you're engaged in small group discussions or you're hearing the presentation from Dom and myself, you might not agree with some of it, and that's okay. Of course, encouraging folks to take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. So just thinking a little bit about some of the complex conversations we might be having, what that might bring up for you. And then, of course, it's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. And, when you're in the small group discussions, I hope that you'll engage in rich conversation, and we have some prompts for that, but it's up to you. If you're feeling more like a passive participant today, that's also okay. And then finally, we can all engage in ways that support others. So this isn't a place of healing or therapeutic support, even though we'll be addressing some of the ways social workers can contribute to climate justice. And this conversation can bring up some big things, but it's not a place for healing and therapy, but we all have the opportunity to support each other. So as you're engaging in conversation, just thinking about the ways that we can be good humans with each other. The agenda today, we're going to do a quick check-in in the chat. We're going to have a presentation on active hope and green social work with Dominic Boyd. I'm going to review some of the things around codes of ethics and standards of practice that relate to this topic, and also share something around social policy and child and youth frameworks that address climate and those frameworks. And I'll have a small group discussion and some share backs from you folks, and then a checkout. So a check-in in the chat. I'd love for you folks to share, if you have the capacity and energy for this right now, how are you arriving? So like, what are you thinking about as you enter into this chat in this conversation with us today? What land you are on using Mi'kmaq place names if you've never done that before, and also what motivated you to attend. So I'm just going to type that in the chat here. Ooh, here we go. How are you arriving? What land you are on? And what motivated. So this is just in the chat. So please, it would be really helpful to see if some folks, how are you arriving and what brought you here today? Objectives today's session. So we were hoping that you will leave the session today with, a deeper understanding, some knowledge of the climate emergency and social justice and how it's connected to social work. Hopefully you leave with some skills, that you get engaging discussions with others around sustainability and how to carry this work forward in your own context. And then hopefully you'll have some shifts in feelings and attitudes around climate emergency and the role of social workers in addressing this. Reminder for PD tracking, you can claim this as formal professional development. And reminder, we are in a funny little renewal year. We actually have 13 months to this one, so we're not actually finished until January 31st. So hopefully most of you on the call have already submitted your PD activities. And if you're looking for more hours, this will technically count towards 2024 and can be categorized in formal professional development. So we're going to get started here in a second with the content, and I want to introduce Dominic Boyd, who's going to be with us today, who is a social worker, registered social worker, currently semi-retired, working part-time with Family Services in Nova Scotia. He's worked in the health field since 1986, so quite a diverse career in terms with nursing homes, community health center, 2 mental health clinics. But he's also quite involved in the community in the Pictou area. So he's on the community health board, chairing mental wellness roundtable, coordinating committee, pardon me. He's also a board member of the Pictou County Community Health Center and the Pictou County Palliative Care Society. He also volunteers quite a bit with the Caregiver Support Group for Alzheimer's Society, member of the Green Party, and of course, happily married to Jane McMaster with 3 adult children and 3 darling grandchildren. So with that, Dom, I am going to pass it over to you, and I'll take over the letting people in, and I'm just going to pin you so people can see you as well. So hopefully what people will be seeing right now is the share screen and Dom. And Dom, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. And you're going to look after the waiting room from now on.
I will, yeah, thank you.
If you would, please. I'm so glad to see so many names, so much interest in this topic. Welcome, everybody. And from my heart, I'm really so glad to see such a positive response here. So I'd like to talk with you today about green social work and about active hope. And let's start with what is the problem. And to start with that, I'd like to remind people about the old adage that goes, you cannot solve a problem by using the same thinking that went into creating the problem in the first place. So the book, Green Social Work, and the book, Active Hope, are a couple of key books that I've been reading. And I also started on that reading journey by reading Thich Nhat Hanh's book on Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet. And in my discussions with my meditation group, it occurred to me that we could take this forward to the social work college and begin organizing, hopefully, social workers in tackling this problem and coming together to unite and to express our our ideas for solving this. We've got around 3,000 members. That's a lot of people. And if we can get 3,000 people together to work on these issues, I think that's a lot of good can happen. So what is the problem? The problem is that the atmosphere of our planet is warming slowly but inevitably due to human activity that produces greenhouse gases. These gases trap heat in the atmosphere and are leading to what we call runaway warming and actually heating. I like to call it global heating because it lends more of a sense of urgency to the problem. As things warm up, more methane gas, for instance, is being released from the permafrost areas up in the north. And so what we are dealing with is a problem that's just going to keep getting worse and worse unless we make some fundamental changes. The negative effects of this global heating are impacting vulnerable populations the most, although these vulnerable populations usually have been the least benefited by those activities that actually produce these effects in the first place. So there are people who have power, who have money, who are contributing to the problem, and often are in denial about it, or maybe they know it's really a problem, but they're pretending otherwise because they don't want to lose the power and the financial strength that they have. So we as social workers, I believe, need to take note of that and consider what is our role in helping those vulnerable populations in various ways. So these issues do stem from the attitudes, the harmful attitudes, such as that the earth is ours to plunder, and from adherence to economic systems that benefit the few the most, and the related unjust power relationships that are occurring. I see Pamela. I used to work with you, Pamela, a long time ago, back at Northwood. Nice to see you here with us. When we think about who's going to be affected, we have to recognize that the equatorial belt around the Earth, around the globe, is going to become unlivable, essentially. Many millions of people live in that zone, and they will face starvation, they will face thirst, and they will want to migrate to places that are more comfortable and more livable. And so there's going to be a huge uprooting over the next number of years of those societies. Next slide is global heating and vulnerable populations.
Next slide. One more, Tom.
Next slide, it says global heating.
Perfect. There we are.
Thank you. That's it. So a little while ago, this Connecting the Dots article came out, and this is relating to how poverty and climate change are interconnected. This document was prepared by the Eastern Zone Community Health Boards, by Mental Health and Addictions Health Promotion Team, and the Public Health Healthy Communities Team. So I'll just briefly go over a couple of key points. Climate change and vulnerable populations, factors such as poverty, education, race, age, and immigrant status cause increased risk of the impacts from climate change. Those who contribute the most to climate change are the least likely to experience its adverse impacts. They have the power, they have the money to be able to avoid or deal with these problems. But most people in the world won't have those resources. Indigenous peoples are particularly sensitive to the impacts of climate change. As people probably know, the problem is worse in the north and in the south, in the more polar regions. The heating is going on several times as fast, as in other areas. It's affecting their traditional food sources and their ability to do things like hunting. If there's no ice to stand on, then they can't hunt the way they usually do, and the foods that they depend on, such as seals and so on, are going to be impacted as well. Indigenous people are also more likely to experience poverty and have fewer resources to deal with the effects of climate change. People who experience poverty are more likely to have poor health, and those living with chronic conditions are at greater risk of illness or death by climate change, as they get exposed to extreme weather events, water-related illnesses, poor air quality. Mental health is another factor. We know that particularly younger people are worried about the future and what kind of a world they're going to inherit, and they have every right to be. And there are terms for that: eco-grief, eco-anxiety, and various other terms, which we need to acknowledge that the young people are feeling this way, and that we have a duty, a responsibility to give them a world that they can live in. Energy poverty is another factor. Those who lack the ability to pay for adequate heat, electricity, and other utilities, they're going to be struggling more with things like extreme heat. And we know that, for instance, when there was a heat wave out west, over 800 elderly people died as a result of the heat wave. They didn't have air conditioning. So it's not just the ability to heat your home, it's the ability to cool your home is going to become more and more prevalent, even here in Canada. Affordable housing, people are going to be affected by heat and cold more as we have extremes of the weather. And we do know that those who cannot afford housing are going to be even in more rough shape if they're living in tents or are living on the street, what have you. So we want to address the root causes. We want to look at the health impacts of climate change, but we also need to factor in such vulnerabilities as poverty and race, homelessness, and food insecurity. We know those vulnerable people are going to be disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. So we also need to recognize that measures to help adapt for the future are needed today, and that those measures will cost, but they actually are an investment, and they need to be seen that way. So with all of that, that leads to the notion that we are in a developing public health emergency. So the next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of declaring a health emergency related to climate change, our public health agency in Nova Scotia is currently developing a position statement on climate change and what it can do about it. And my next meeting today at 6 o'clock is to provide input and feedback from various sources around the province regarding the first draft that they have developed of that statement. So I was very pleased to see that they're working on this, and I got quite excited and offered to help if I could. As Tyler mentioned, I'm associated with the Community Health Board. I co-chair the board up here in Pictou West. And for some time now, I've been talking with our board and the other boards about climate change and the issues, and encouraging all of the community health boards to come together. We're working on developing some kind of a statement. And then when we heard that the public health people are working on a statement, we thought, well, why don't we collaborate on that? So that's what's going on. The Nova Scotia Coalition for Community Wellbeing is incorporating addressing climate change in its goals. We had a meeting a couple of months ago where we talked about incorporating this. So along with addressing poverty as a huge issue, climate change is also another that we want to see people come together on. So with that public health emergency sense of urgency, the question then comes, where are the social workers? Where is the College of Social Workers? And we know that the college has been working on the ethics related to this. We know that the CASW is working on this. And so this brings us to what we're doing today, which is the first of a four-part series of webinars, which hopefully will help people to learn about these problems and take a stand on mobilizing. Social workers have plenty of skills, attitudes, etc., that can help us to mobilize and address these problems. I also wanted to add that in terms of a public health emergency, I was on the Pictou County Council's Climate Change Committee. And during that time, we persuaded the council itself, Pictou County Council, to declare a climate emergency. And they have since created a plan for addressing climate change here in Pictou. And we also know that other municipalities are creating responses. So it's catching on, and that's very encouraging to know. Next slide, please. So in what ways has social work actually been part of the problem? We need to be honest with ourselves and recognize that as a group, we have been relatively silent on this issue, and it's time to change that. We have been, in my mind, too focused on working with individuals and families within the sort of micro level, and but abiding by the current systems that we live under, capitalism, neoliberalism, and other isms that have led to our earth being negatively impacted here, and so many people suffering and who will suffer as a result of climate change issues. We recognize that social workers often feel constrained because of the policies in the workplaces that they have to live under, and taking a stand on things can be scary. I'm kind of in a good space because I'm semi-retired and I can put a lot of time into this. I don't have to have something approved by a boss, which is wonderful. If we do work with agencies, then we recognize that oftentimes those are funded by governments and subject in some ways to the control of government. And so it's risky to critique the structures and the powers that be, those things that are continuing to make the problem worse over time. Social work has had a traditional identity issue of are we sort of the charity model versus the structural change model. And it's easy to just think about, well, I just want to help people. But we have to face the big problems, the big picture here. We need to do it all, not just one thing. And as well, to me, there's been something of a lack of critical thinking and organizing in the face of the global heating issue. And that's why I'm so glad that people are coming here today, because we'll get some bit more information on how people are feeling about this. Are people actually practicing critical thinking? Are people doing some organizing? We're going to have chat rooms a little later on, and that'll be a chance to share about those things, because I wouldn't be surprised if people are doing something, but I'm also thinking that there's probably a lot of people who want to do something and just need a little help to get started. So that brings us around to the next slide. Moving away from being part of a problem, what about being part of the solution. So you know that in 2020, the CASW did put together a 2-page position statement on integrating climate justice into social work practice. 3 main themes for that: educating, advocating, and be the change we want to see. In other words, how we ourselves live our lifestyles. Do we do things to reduce our carbon footprint in particular? The Nova Scotia College of Social Work Code of Ethics, that's being worked on, and I believe there's now a more concrete statement. Tyler's going to speak more to this around the commitment to a clean and healthy environment and developing sustainable environmental strategies. Social workers, we are going to learn and do practice green social work as part of the solution, and building and sustaining active hope, which we're going to explain a little bit further down. Okay, how are we doing for time? 12:30. We've got 10 more minutes.
Yeah, we'll take the time we need, Dom. But yeah, we'll probably want to
Okay.
transition to the small groups for at least 12:45 if possible.
Okay, thanks very much. So the next slide. Okay, so I thought I'd share a little bit about my own story with this issue. And as a human being, I sort of struggle with trying to address this issue, and feeling some qualms and fears that others might think I'm a little wacko or something. I had to kind of face those and let go of those kinds of fears. But yeah, a certain, I like to be involved with these issues, but I find it takes energy. It takes confronting those sort of misgivings that I sometimes have, and probably others feel as well. But at some point, some years ago, I decided that because I had children and grandchildren, I wanted to be able to say to them, if they ever asked me, Dad, did you ever do anything about climate change? I'd like to be able to say yes. And so I got involved with things. The first step was joining the Green Party. There was the federal campaign happening, the federal election. And I contributed to that in a couple of ways. One of them was I have skills with writing, so I drafted speaker notes for our candidate, Barry, in this area. And I also found out that there was a very good film about climate change called Climate Change and the Human Prospect. So I offered to get that film and show it. And it's a 42-minute documentary. So I did show it in a number of places, libraries and things. Didn't get a big response to it, but I did make that effort. And I still have that film, and I have shown it in some schools and a couple of libraries since. I also decided to join the local climate change advisory committee and see if I could help in some ways. And there were 2 key things that I think I did. One of them was I pushed them to recommend to council that they declare the climate emergency. The other thing, and this is kind of like a social work skill, bringing people together. I had a friend who's got a background in engineering management. I persuaded him to join that committee, and he's still on it actually. And he has been able to bring together enough people to create the action plan for the county. And they're currently going around the county doing 8 sessions to inform the public and give the public a chance to have input into that. So those social work skills of speaking up and of bringing people together and critiquing things, those are incredibly important, I think, in doing this sort of work. I began to educate myself further on the issue, reading, discussing with others, and that's been very helpful. Brought the community health board into the issue, and we've incorporated addressing climate change issues in our latest 5-year plan that we've put together. And I also brought this up at the conference that they had last year and that this is going to be brought into the next conference as well. How can the community health boards work together on the global heating issues? And I've been pushing for us to work with other agencies such as public health and the Ecology Action Center. And recently, at the Dalhousie Health Justice Institute, I went to a workshop there on planetary health justice. And there was the lecturer was very strong on the issues that climate change is bringing to Indigenous groups in particular, and stressing how Indigenous groups have much to offer by way of helping change beliefs and practices that are harmful to Mother Earth. So I'm hoping to follow up with that lecturer. She Nicole Redvers, she works at University of Western Ontario, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to bring her down sometime to give an address on these issues. Next page. So at the college, I've mentioned about the film, the Nova Scotia Coalition for Community Wellbeing. I've brought up the issue of climate change there, and people have sort of hopped onto that bus. They are very interested in addressing climate change as well as poverty and housing and those issues. I mentioned my meditation group already. I find that a real source of strength, that I can talk with them and say, hey, look, these are the things I'm doing. These are the things I'm struggling with. And they're very supportive. And I've noticed they started to talk about these issues more with people in their lives. So it's something that's growing bit by bit. Brought these matters up at the local, our local network. We have a network here in Pictou County. I did connect with the person who wrote the Green Social Work book. Her name's Lena Dominelli, teaching at the University of Stirling in Scotland. And more lately, meeting Tyler and beginning to work on this issue with Tyler and the college to create this series and to develop ways of working together. So we're going to look now, next slide, please. What is green social work? And I know that we're running kind of low on time, so I'll try and move this along. There's a lot to be said for green social work. So the goal of it is that we work toward humanity's basic needs being met, and that planet Earth is sustained as a living entity, what we call the Gaia hypothesis. We recognize that the planet is one big system, and how we live within the system. We are not above the system, and we need to recognize that we are part of this system. Green social work critiques the current political and economic systems that are destroying our planet and creating misery for untold numbers of the most vulnerable people. Green social work argues for a profound transformation of these systems, and it works at all levels, macro, meso, and micro, and it is holistic. It practice focused on the interdependence among people. Next slide. So green social work on the macro level that addresses and critiques the political and economic systems that are current, and advocates for climate, health, and economic justice. On the meso level, at the agency level, and so on, government level, critiques policies and agencies that fail to respond to the needs of those most affected by climate change. It proposes more effective and dignified programming. And of course, on the micro level, more direct service level, assist people in addressing consequences of global heating, such as disasters that are happening, and in building capacity and resilience, bringing people together to discuss their issues, discover their power and their agency, and help them along those roads. So active hope. Next slide, please. Sustenance for the journey. We all need to find a way to keep faith with ourselves, to keep our energies up. And so active hope is based on the book by Joanna Macy. And here are some key aspects of it. We can think of hope in a kind of a hopeless way, like there is no hope. We can think of hope in terms of passively saying, well, I hope someone will do something about this. I hope that governments will eventually see the light. And they are to some degree, some governments, which is good. But we can also do what we call active hope, which is where we say, I hope such and such happens, and this is what I am going to do to start making that happen. So it's about identifying some clear outcomes that we do hope for and playing a role in moving forward toward those outcomes. So several types of outcomes. Well, there's holding actions where we try to hold back and slow down the damage that's being done to our environment, to our earth. We can look at ways to enhance life-sustaining systems and practices. We're talking about redesigning, reinvesting at what kind of economy do we want to have? What kind of housing do we want to have? What kind of energy systems do we need, etc. And we need to have shifts in consciousness. So we hope that the work we do can help people to shift the consciousness to one more of care and compassion for us, ourselves, our neighbors, the earth as a whole, all of nature, our connected selves, our personal and spiritual development are all part of this. And by having these shifts in consciousness, they enhance our capacity and desire to act for our world. So we don't just sort of buy into the current systems. We say, no, we need better systems. We need to enhance our own personal and spiritual development and move away from consumerism, which is a big part of the problem. So next slide, please. So Joanna Macy talks about the work that reconnects. She says that we've alienated ourselves from planet Earth and we need to reconnect. We need to empower ourselves to act and move away from that hopelessness that we sometimes might feel. And this work comes from having a gratitude for life, for our lives, for the lives of all creatures, for all of nature, and for all that sustains it. We need to honor the pain that we feel, the grief we feel for what's happening in the world, the fear we feel, the anxiety. We need to honor that. Those are real feelings. And we can act with those. They can empower us to move forward and grapple with the issues that need to be addressed. Seeing with new eyes, recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, recognizing we need a very different way of living if we're going to have an earth that's livable. And then actually doing something about it, going forth, taking practical steps. Next page, please. So we're nearly at the end. So Macy talks about the active hope practice spiral. And this is something that I think is very helpful in terms of going forth with new eyes. Starting with thinking about something about the world that we love. It could be a person, it could be a place, it could be trees, it could be whatever. Fill in the blank. I love such and such. So I'm coming from a place of love. Then I come from a place of gratitude. I'd like to thank whatever, Mother Nature, the people down the street, the Green Party, who knows, but something we're grateful for. And then having grounded ourselves in what we love and what we're grateful for, we can then think about, well, what concerns do I have for the future? And these may be many. And facing these concerns, what inspires me is, what would help me to address these things in some way, what would inspire me? Well, certainly once I've thought about that, I can then begin to be a little more concrete. What I hope for in the future is, and this could be a long-term goal, a short-term goal, but we think about then a part that I'd like to play in what I'm hoping for. It could be that I'll call someone. It could be that I'll read a book. I'll join the Green Party, whatever. Um, I'll go to the next webinar. And then something that I can do relatively quickly to get started, not in months ahead, but just in the next week, over the next week, what's something I can do? You know, it could be as simple as going to the library and reading up on some issue with that. It could be looking up a website like David Suzuki's foundation, Ecology Action Center. You know, there's different possible steps, but making an actual concrete step. I think as social workers, we know a lot about that sort of thing. The final slide, number 14, please, is about letting go. And this is part of the Buddhist tradition, which I found very helpful. So it's about watching out for how our egos can get kind of connected to this, of wanting to be important, of wanting to sort of be in charge, that sort of thing. And so letting go is really about taking action, but not worrying too much about control. It's about letting go of the desire to control outcomes, letting go of our egos, of letting go of, you know, this is about me, or this is, I want this and I want that, but recognizing we need to work together in an interconnected way. Being open to outcomes. When we take steps, we actually need to let go. We want certain outcomes, but outcomes can often differ from what we originally thought, and we need to be flexible in addressing that and saying, yeah, you know, when I first started with this, I used to think this way, but now I think that way, and I think this will work better than that because we've tried. So this brings up what we call action and reflection, the praxis model that Paulo Freire and others have used, and I think is an incredibly valuable way of working, that we take a step and then we reflect, how did that work? What did we learn from it? And that leads then to next step, and then we repeat the process. I love this little adage, if you want to learn how something works, try to change it. As we engage with these issues, we will uncover more understanding of the systems that are at foot and that are basically leading us, wrecking the planet. We do need to change them, but we also need to understand them if we're going to have effect. The final thing is, let's inspire ourselves. Yes, we may feel some fears, some reservations, whatever. Do it anyway. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for attending today. So Tyler, I'll hand it back to you, I think.
Thanks, Dom. I really appreciate that. So hopefully I'm coming through here for you folks. We are going to go to breakout rooms here shortly, but I wanted to cover up a few other elements from the social policy framework, some of the work around child and youth work, and also the code of ethics. I'm going to just review those quickly. So the CSW position statement that Dom alluded to earlier, I put it in the chat. It'll also be sent out in the follow-up email on Eventbrite later today. But those pieces that are being spoken to in the position statement are that we have to integrate climate justice into social work practice, and we have to educate ourselves and others, advocate for changes in policies and practices, and then be the change we wish to see in the world. And part of this is reconciling with the fact that social work as a profession is a colonial construct. And so we're always in this paradoxical relationship between, are we the solution, are we the problem, as Dom alluded to? And I just think it's important that we hold on to that awareness of paradox and the interconnectedness of this with harm, but also potential solutions. The Code of Ethics, so the one released by CSW in January 2024, has a lot more content and commitment towards social justice, truth and reconciliation, and our upcoming Code of Ethics, which builds off of the CASW Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice is, more clear. And that'll be coming out probably in April. It sounds like we're pretty close to revising it and making it specific to the Mi'kmaq, Nova Scotia context. But really, value 2 in the CASW and the Nova Scotia Nova Scotia College of Social Workers upcoming revised Code of Ethics is around promoting social justice. And the clear principle there is 2.4 in the CASW and the 2.5 in ours, and it's social workers advocate for the stewardship of natural resources and the protection of the environment for the common good of all people. But it's not the only one that is connected to climate justice. There are others. And so we have guiding principle 2.5, social workers advocate for the stewardship of natural resources, but the context or practice deepens it. So we have promote the protection of the environment, that's land, air, water, plants, and animals, identify how climate change is interconnected to social work practice and how it also exacerbates social inequalities, making sure we deeply understand environmental racism, and how systemic oppression is interconnected. And finally, social workers acknowledge the rights of Indigenous peoples to steward their own lands. I've seen some folks in the chat saying they might not be able to stay for the whole thing. Totally understand. Some people only have access to an hour. This call is going to go for an hour and a half, and we will have it recorded as well. So if you want to catch up later, you're more than welcome to check out our YouTube. But yeah, I want to acknowledge again. So the social workers acknowledge the rights of Indigenous peoples to steward their own lands. And for me, as someone who's deeply committed to decolonization, this is a central point of addressing climate justice. So these are some of the principles that are associated with the value in principle 2.5. So these are the standards. So incorporating Mi'kmaq Indigenous perspectives, upholding constitutional and treaty rights, advocating for policies, facilitating access to adaptation resources. So we look to the fires in LA, the wildfires here, the floods that are happening, the increasing prevalence of, natural disasters, making sure that we're not just focused on building a utopian in the future, but also more practically understanding that changes are happening. We have to mitigate them, making sure we're supporting for environmental protections, and then also really understanding the impact of climate change on marginalized and historically excluded groups. Some other ones as well, respecting the dignity and worth of all people. So focusing on the rights and protection from historical harms, right status and needs of Indigenous people. This is also inherently interconnected with climate justice and adaptation, pursuing truth and reconciliation. So the principles and values of reconciliation and Indigenous worldviews also as well connected. Social policy framework. This came out from the College of Social Workers and CCPA Nova Scotia in 2020. And it's a framework for how institutions and organizations can help develop social policy that is grounded in principles. And one of them is really clearly stated around climate justice. So anytime a municipal, provincial, federal government or large institutions creating policies that might affect the social landscape, these are some of the ways that they are some of the principles that they should be incorporating. So interconnecting this decolonization, social inclusion, and very explicitly climate justice. And so as we envision the future that we're working towards, how might we create policy that incorporates these principles? There's a really great resource on the workbook on the CCPA Nova Scotia website. This link as well will be sent out in the email later on. And I'm going to throw it in the chat now if people are curious. I'll have the report and the workbook. And it's a really great resource. If you're developing policies in your own organization or you know someone who is, this is a great resource to look to how you can build a framework for policies. In child and youth work as well. So there's a report put out called Building an Ecosystem to Realize Children's Rights and Support Family Wellbeing in Nova Scotia. And there's an afterword that has a call for climate justice. So this is put out by Wisdom to Action in collaboration with the college. And one of the clear quotes here that's referenced in the document says, as the climate crisis grows, so does its harmful effects on marginalized communities in Nova Scotia through environmental racism. It's from Ryan Bryant in 2018, referenced in this report. And the interviews and consultations really demonstrated that there was a clear and direct link between climate injustice and the impact on youth and families. So some of the recommendations from that report were to amend the Environmental Goals and Climate Change Reduction Act, establish, adopt, and support an interconnected approach to end environmental racism. So again, kind of calling back to the social policy framework and that interconnectedness in social policy. Develop an action plan to address environmental racism and its impact on children through interdepartmental collaboration. So, resisting the siloed approach in terms of government services. Calculate environmental impact of departmental services. So examples, travel and associated fuel consumption, and start to develop alternatives. So instead of just, theorizing about what can be done, finding practical ways to mitigate now. And then Finally, become a leader amongst government departments in adopting and advocating for systemic changes. So we've recently had a provincial election here, and we do have a new government department, social opportunities and social development. I think that's how it is. So thinking a little bit, as social workers, as some of the primary folks who do this work, how can we, shift our worldview and our consciousness, as Dominic had said, in this work? So just a reminder, active hope and interconnectedness, decolonization and Indigenous resistance and resurgence and climate justice are all entangled. And so, Indigenous people around the world have been actively engaged in climate justice work since the beginning of time. And there are people, here in Turtle Island, in Mi'kmaq, and around the world who are actively defending water and land and protecting it. And we could do a better job of supporting the work that's already happening. Many industries are interconnected with climate justice, and as we activate hope, we have to work towards the removal of barriers and allocating resources towards interconnected issues of freedom and liberation. Seeing some work here or some chat as well, so people resonating with this content. It's renewal time, so lots of phone calls coming right now. So we're going to jump into some small group discussions, and I'm going to anticipate there's going to be about probably 5 to 6 people per group, but it's really about relating, sense making, debriefing, and just going a bit deeper. So some Zoom housekeeping in a few seconds here, a few moments, you're going to get a notification that you're being pulled out into a breakout room. We'll probably go for about 15 minutes. But this is some of the ways it might show up on your device, depending on how you're connecting. So whether you're using a computer or a tablet, you should get a pop-up and it says there's a room for you to join. Really, yes, absolutely. Thank you for coming. But yeah, please join the breakout rooms. And it's important that, I'm going to give you some prompts to discuss in the breakout rooms. But even more so, connect with each other. You use the prompts as a menu. You can speak to them or you can have another conversation. But whatever conversation you have in that room is the right one. But it is my hope and desire that you do debrief and unpack and sense make a little bit of the content from today. Some of the questions, and I'll post these in the chat. So what's coming up for you around active hope and addressing climate change as social workers? I'm seeing people in the chat already talking about this as well. When thinking about the different levels of social work, so again, that micro, meso, macro, what are your roles as social workers to mitigate and adapt to climate change? And then finally, how do you find hope in addressing climate-related issues? So as we think about this title, active hope, what is driving you towards making a change? So, I'm seeing lots of folks having to drop off, totally understand. And my hope is that you are able to share back a little bit afterwards. So for those of us who are still with us on this call, as we come back into the larger group, I'm hoping to hear from 2 to 3 people and what came up for you. So just give me a moment here while I stop sharing. Pause recording. Welcome back, folks. And so we are recording again. So if you don't want to be on camera, I invite you to turn off your camera. I am going to ask folks to turn off their mics if possible. And what I'd like to do in our remaining time is to hear from some of you folks. So I want to hear back from 2 to 3 people, if possible. Like, what came up in your discussions? Any themes, ideas, or stories emerging from your conversations with other social workers in other jurisdictions, or I guess in other regions? And in the chat, everyone, please, what are you leaving with today? What might be giving you hope in this moment? And so thinking about this idea of active hope, like, what is getting you through the days? Because life is complex and it's hard for many. We deal with very complex situations, whether we're macro practice or micro practice, or working within institutions. And so what keeps you going? So 2 things. Let's hear from 2 to 3 people using your voice and your camera, if possible, and like what came up your discussions. And then for everyone, please in the chat, what are you leaving with today and what might be giving you hope? And so if you were looking to speak, please be, oh, Katie, perfect. I see your hand. So if you could go and just tell us what came up in your small group discussions. Oh, Katie, you're still muted there. So I just pressed the little button there for asking
Yeah,
you to unmute.
got
Perfect.
it. Sorry. I put my hand up because I see Femi next to me, and she was in our breakout room and left and didn't get a chance to finish. But I wanted to share that what was happening in our little group and what came out of the discussion was a little bit of a theme emerging. What Femi was talking about made me think of what we learned earlier on one of the slides about green social work. And I have to read it because I wrote it down. It's not here yet. But it critiques the current political and economic systems that are destroying our planet. And we had a perfect example of that in our group. And I just want to say to Femi, even thinking about it and bringing it up, Femi, I think you're starting green social work. I think the little bud to be able to label it. So yeah, that's what I want to share.
Thanks, Katie. I really appreciate that. Anyone else feeling called to like to share some of the themes or ideas that came up from your discussions?
Hello.
Hi, Femi. Yes, please go.
Hi. Um, Thank you so much, Katie, for addressing that. Actually, in our group, we were discussing how everybody missed this relevant topic, green social work. I've been thinking about this since a long time, since I was a child, and nobody cared about like the Mother Earth. I was telling them I couldn't finish it. I was telling them that. We are actually utilizing everything from Mother Nature. We are like a sponge absorbing all the resources for our own benefit, but we are not giving anything back to the nature. We are cutting the trees down for making furnitures, for making our everything comfortable for us. We are in our comfort zone, leaving the earth, to get disrupted, like to destroyed, to be destroyed. So I think it's time. Well, it's not too late. Let's not wait until everything is gone, because as because of so many factors like the infrastructural development, the population growth, and like the food industry, everything is growing, but the nature, the environment is been degrading. So we need to focus on that. And I think social workers could be the frontline workers for that. We can lead. I haven't seen, like I was telling my team, I used to watch movies related to like environmental calamities, and I witnessed a few back at home in India. So I know how serious this is, and I haven't seen social workers in front of it. Like nobody gives significance to the social workers. So I think it's time that we have to be the frontline workers, addressing the problems, and not only the problems, like we have to find the solution, the action plan, and implement it. And we can spread the awareness to the public, to create the awareness, to make them understand how significant this problem is, and how we can make the change by being the change.
Mm,
It starts from one
yeah.
person. It creates a ripple effect.
Mm, yeah, that's so helpful to hear. And I know many of us might have grown up with like the idea of be the change you want to see in the world. We all have agency and choice. And I think we're constantly bombarded with information and messaging that tells us that we don't have agency and choice. And we have to remind ourselves that like, yeah, we are a system within a larger system. And every little action we take has like a fractal spin-off out there in the world. And so everything we do matters, which can be
Yeah.
overwhelming as well. But at the same time, that's where I find a little bit of hope as well. Thank you for saying that, Femi.
Thank
Can
you.
I make a comment about
Yeah,
the
Linda.
I was in? Yes, hi. It's interesting because we are kind of from all around the province, and I was talking about how living in Prospect, I'm around the woods, and so the fires that went on a couple of years ago in Tintell and Timberley, and even in I think it's called Ragged Lake, which is it impacted on us because we couldn't get through on Prospect Road to get home. And how I look around and I think, and I've thought about this for ever since the fires. If a fire started down here, we would have a hard time getting out. And how, like I heard on the news the other day, one of the communities that were affected by the fires a couple of years ago have now gone fire smart. They have, apparently there's a program available where you can follow certain guidelines to protect your home and also protect the forest, and all the creatures that live in it. And so I was sharing this, and then one of the ladies there, she just moved to back from the States, and she was comparing our Canadians, I guess, or Nova Scotians being green compared to where she lived. And we were talking, which is great. And I said, that gives me hope because it says that Canadians are doing something at least to be more green. So you have to have some hope and you have to be positive with what we're doing, but we also have to do better. And I look at it that, the issue of politics about Trump now really bringing the Americans back to the dark ages in a lot of areas. And how, this issue about when he said he'd like to take Canada, by economics and make it the 51 state. And I think that made every Canadian, especially the snowbirders who are down there, want to come home. And there's a sense of pride being Canadian, right? I think we have a lot to offer as Canadians and as social workers. I think we can be leaders because I think if you say one thing to one person or you do anything, an action, it can have a ripple effect on another person taking that action as well. So I think that to me is what came from our group. We all have a part to play on a small micro scale.
Thanks for that, Linda. I agree. We all have a part to play, and all of us are here today because we made a choice at some point to become social workers, right? And we don't know what our future brings when we make those choices. You might not have known that you were in the practice that you're in now. You might have thought you might have had a different job. I know when I applied to social work, I was like, I want to work in corrections. Now I'm like, I could never work in corrections. So we all just make choices and we can never really anticipate where to go. But if we apply a sense of hope towards our choices that we make around, climate justice, we have to be open to outcomes, as Dominic had said earlier. And I think that's why the series has been created. And so I appreciate, Linda, you saying, sharing, and Katie and Femi as well. And for other folks still on the call, I appreciate you engaging in those small group discussions. And we're going to transition to wrapping up here at the moment, but do encourage you again to check out in the chat if you can. Please fill out the evaluation survey. It's really, really helpful in gathering data and feedback about these series of events. So that's also in the chat. The link to the survey will also be in the email that will go out later today with the resources. I'm just going to share my screen one more time. I just want to share a little bit of what's coming up. So, I know you folks are on this call, so that means you at some point we're on Eventbrite and register, which I really appreciate. And it's a great place to know where our upcoming PD is going to be. Want to highlight our upcoming sessions for Active Hope. So part 2 on February 27th, that'll be on Eventbrite hopefully next week, is going to be on queering social work, green social work. So connecting this idea of queerness and how it relates to climate justice. And I'll be facilitating that session and hosting it myself. Part 3 is around meso-social work and climate justice, and that's going to be with Kate Matheson, who is on the call here today. And then part 4, we're going to be joined by Dr. Ingrid Waldron, who will be speaking around environmental racism. You might be familiar with her work around environmental racism and climate justice for the movie and the book, There's Something in the Water. She's presented here at the college before. Really looking forward to working with her. January 30th, there's going to be a Connections Cultivating Our Wellness session, and that's around self-care, prevention of vicarious trauma and secondary stress. And then February 3rd, we're going to be having a lunch and learn on Afrocentric principles of social work, so joined by 3 social workers here from the college who are African Nova Scotian, and I'm looking forward to that one as well. So I encourage you to follow, like, subscribe all of the social channels that we're on. So Eventbrite, following us is great. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. If you are still engaged in the process of renewals, reach out to me anytime. But you can also complete hours using our YouTube channel, which is down below. You can also just search NSCSW and we pop up pretty quickly. But yeah, really appreciate everyone being here today. Really grateful to Dominic's leadership on this work and really driving forward this idea and allowing us to come up with these sessions. So Dominic, great job. Thank you so much. And I don't know if you have any final words, Dominic, that you want to share? I'm putting you on the spot.
Thank you. I just want to thank everybody. And I put a little notice here about the community of practice concept, that how can we foster green social work? How can we practice? How can we learn? How can we support each other? those sort of things are involved in the possibility of having a community of practice talking about ways that people are getting more involved in this issue can be very inspiring. We do need to work together, and I'd like to explore how can all 3,000 of us come together and unite on taking a stand on certain issues, that sort of thing. So we've off to a good start today. So many people have joined in, and I know a lot had to leave at 1, but we still have 20 some people left, which is great. I'm just really happy that we could have this session today. I'm happy for the contributions everyone's made, for your listening and your learning and your sharing. So yeah, thank you. I'm grateful.
All right. Thank you, Dominic. And everyone, I hope you have something to look forward to this weekend, that you're staying cozy and warm if you're here in Wangi. And please reach out anytime if you have any thoughts around how we can continue forward this conversation around or climate justice, pardon me, and social work. But otherwise, yeah, enjoy the rest of your day and your week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, folks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.